Phelps had picked up the note and was staring at it with bulging eyes. "Blackmail!" he exclaimed. "Good Lord, Mr. Holmes, you don't think that our hall has been mixed up in some scandal?"
Holmes shrugged. "My dear sir, halls, like knives or revolvers, are neutral instruments. It is only when they fall into guilty hands that scandal is produced. Tell me, did you observe anyone hanging about Beak Street or its neighbourhood on Friday afternoon?"
Beak Street? Why should I? I was here all day, attending to the rehearsal, the box office, the usual chaos of a concert night.
"Quite so. I was merely probing for coincidence, not cause. Now, is there any other entrance or exit from this building by which a man might have left without passing the stage door or the front?"
"Only a small door at the back, leading to the alley behind the hall. It's usually kept bolted. The fire regulations, you understand, oblige us to have it, but as a rule no one uses it."
"We shall have a look at it presently. Meanwhile," Holmes had opened the Russian-English dictionary and was riffling through its pages, his lips moving faintly as though translating some remembered word. Suddenly he stopped and raised his head, his expression intent. "Curious," he murmured. "Very curious. Watson, come here."
I stepped to his side. Upon the margin of one of the pages, in a cramped hand similar to that of the blackmail note, but more careful, I saw some words written in Russian characters. Beside them, in English, appeared the phrase, "Glory Street, 2nd floor, left."
"An address?" I suggested. "Possibly, or possibly only a mnemonic to recall some phrase. But in either case, it shows that the writer of the note had access to this book, or that Orloff himself wrote the note. There are several possibilities, and we must be cautious in our inferences." He closed the dictionary and replaced it in the case. "Come, Mr. Phelps," he said briskly. "You shall now show us the back door. After that, we will trouble you no more tonight."
The rear exit of the hall was down a narrow, ill-lit corridor, at the end of which a heavy wooden door barred the way. "It's kept bolted, as I told you," said Phelps, fumbling with the chain. "See? Top and bottom."
Holmes stooped and examined the bolts with his lens. There was a faint smear upon the lower one. "Rust," said Phelps. "Not entirely," Holmes returned. "There is rust, yes, but also a thin film of grease, such as would be left if a man's damp fingers slid along the metal. And observe, the line of dust upon the floor is broken here, just where the door would swing if opened. When was this passage last swept?"
"Saturday morning, like the rest of the place," Phelps answered. "I give you my word, Mr. Holmes, that no one has gone in or out this way."
"No one since Saturday morning," Holmes corrected. "But on Friday night, between 6 and 8, it is another matter. I perceive that the bolts have been drawn within the last week. Whether then or earlier, we must determine." He pushed aside the manager's protesting hand and shot back the bolts. The door opened with a reluctant creak, revealing a narrow paved area between the rear of the hall and a high brick wall. Against the wall stood a pile of broken packing cases and a battered metal dustbin. Holmes stepped out, his tall figure outlined for an instant against the dim light from within. "Footprints," he muttered, bending low. "2 sets at least, going and returning. The rain has blurred them badly, but they are still traceable. One man with a long stride, the other shorter, and, I fancy, heavier. The shorter man went out first, the taller followed, but upon their return, the order is reversed. Very suggestive, Watson."
"Suggestive of what?" I demanded, peering fruitlessly at the glistening stones.
"Of a man who is brought back against his will," Holmes replied. "Consider, if 2 friends go out together, they tend to keep their relative positions. The taller man does not suddenly fall behind unless there is some reason. But if one man drives another before him, whether with a pistol or some other implement, the natural order is reversed. The prisoner goes first, the captor follows."
You think, then, that Orlov left by this door with his unknown visitor and was brought back later as a prisoner? I asked. Or that the reverse occurred, said Holmes thoughtfully. It may be that he was lured out as a friend and returned under compulsion, or that he was forced out and returned voluntarily. Until we know more of the man's character, we cannot be sure which is the more probable. For the moment, we merely note the fact that 2 people used this door on Friday between the sweeping and the present heavy rain, and that one of them, at some point, was not entirely free.
He straightened and looked about the little yard. His gaze fell upon the pile of packing cases. "Ha!" he exclaimed softly. "Here is industry, Watson." He moved to the heap, and stooping, drew from beneath one of the boxes a small, crumpled object. It was a fragment of cloth, about 2 inches square, of some smooth black material. "Silk," Holmes observed, holding it up. "From a coat sleeve, I fancy, torn upon a nail or a splinter. Notice the quality, Watson. This is no workman's jacket. Mr. Phelps, do your attendants wear coats of this material?"
Phelps shook his head. "Only ordinary serge or worsted, Mr. Holmes. Nothing so fine as that. Looks like part of an evening coat to me."
"Precisely. Orlov's evening coat lies untouched upon his chair. Therefore, if this came from an evening coat, it is more likely from that of his companion. We shall keep it for reference." He placed the fragment carefully in his pocketbook. "Now, Mr. Phelps, that will suffice for tonight. I shall ask you not to disturb anything further in Orlov's room or in this passage. You will, however, be so good as to inquire discreetly whether any of your staff observed a stranger in a dark ulster and soft hat upon Friday afternoon, and let me know the result."
"I will do what I can," Phelps promised. "But you know what these fellows are, Mr. Holmes. Half of them see everything, and the other half nothing. I shall have to tread carefully, too. The last thing we want is a scare about crime at the Queen's Hall."
Holmes gave an impatient little shrug. "The last thing you want," he corrected. "I, on the contrary, should welcome any amount of noise if it served to bring our man to bay. Nevertheless, I appreciate your position. Good night, Mr. Phelps. You shall hear from me as soon as I have anything of note to report."
We took our leave of the anxious manager and emerged once more into the damp November night. Holmes walked in silence for some distance, his chin sunk upon his breast, his hands thrust deep into his coat pockets. I have seen him thus many times before, when his brain was occupied in weaving the threads of a case into some provisional pattern.
At length, as we turned into Regent Street, he spoke. "Well, Watson, what do you conclude from our little excursion?"
"That Orlov was certainly under some sort of compulsion," I replied. "The footprints at the back door, the threatening note, the quarrel overheard, these all point to violence. But if he was seized, why have we seen no sign of a struggle? No blood, no broken furniture, nothing."
"Excellent, Watson," Holmes cried, clapping me lightly upon the shoulder. "You have put your finger upon one of the chief peculiarities of the case. If a man is removed by force from a concert hall, yet leaves behind his violin and his evening clothes, we may infer one of 2 things. Either the violence was of a very sudden and overwhelming nature, or else it was not manifestly violence at all."
"You mean that he may have gone willingly, not realizing the danger?" I asked.
"Exactly. A man may walk to his own destruction without so much as a raised voice, if the bait is sufficiently tempting or the threat sufficiently subtle. That is what we must determine. Was Orlov entrapped by his own folly, or by another's cunning?"
"And our next step?" I inquired.
Holmes hailed a passing hansom. "To Beak Street, Watson," said he as we climbed in. "We must see what the gentlemen of Hollandby Court can tell us of this affair. It is as well to visit the lay of the land before we retire. Sleep is the reward of those who have first exhausted their opportunities."
London is perhaps unrivaled among the great cities of the world for the abruptness with which it can change its character within the space of a few yards. One may pass from the respectable dullness of a square of professional houses into a rookery of vice and poverty merely by turning a corner.
No better example of this curious juxtaposition could be found in those days than the neighbourhood lying just off Beak Street. The main thoroughfare, with its shops and modest eating-houses, had at least a veneer of decency. But in the narrow courts and blind alleys that branched from it, every race and language of Europe seemed to have found some foothold.
It was into one of these blind alleys, Hollandby Court, that Holmes now led me. The entrance was a mere crack between two houses, down which we turned, leaving the glare of the street behind us. The passage opened into a cramped yard, hemmed in by tall, grimy walls. A single lamp, ill-trimmed and smoking, cast a yellowish circle of light upon the cobbles, leaving the corners in shadow. Around the yard were doors and windows of mean appearance, many of them bearing signs in foreign characters. From one came the rattle of dishes and the odour of boiled cabbage. From another, the thin, reedy strains of a violin played with uncertain skill. Voices drifted on the damp air, German, Russian, Yiddish, and other tongues which I could not identify.
Holmes stood still a moment, taking in the scene. An admirable little microcosm of international vice, he remarked. One could sit here for a week and classify one's fellow creatures. But we have not a week, alas. Let us see if we can find... Ah! He had crossed to a door upon which a flaking sign announced R. Corman, Tailoring and Alterations. Pushing it open without ceremony, he stepped into a low room reeking of steam and stale tobacco. Several men were bent over sewing machines. A woman sat at a table, basting a waistcoat. At the far end, behind a counter littered with garments in various stages of repair, stood a short, thick-set man with a black beard and pince-nez, who looked up sharply as we entered. "What do you want?" he demanded, in strongly accented English.